Hello there, Sharks. I'm Jonathan Little for PokerCoaching.com here with another episode of Weekly Poker Hand. And today we're taking a look at a hand from the GG Millions. This is a $10,000 buy-in tournament that takes place every week on GG Poker, usually featuring a lot of the best players in the world, sometimes a lot of recreational players. This time, though, we're taking a look at a hand heads up between two regulars who get in there and battle hard. We have C. Jepson on the button, and T. Mulecker, sure I'm messing up his name, I apologize, who is in the big blind. We are playing heads up with effectively 40 big blinds or so. 80,000, 160,000 big blinds with 6 million effective chips in this hand. Jepson opens it up on the button with 9-6 of hearts, which is perfectly fine and standard. And Mulecker calls in the big blind with 6-5 offsuit, also perfectly fine and standard. If you find that you are folding hands like 6-5 offsuit before the flop, heads up, well, you're going to end up blinding out for sure. You must get in there, you must battle, you must defend. Also, if you're playing at a full table, 9-handed, especially when you're playing 20, 30, 40 big blinds deep, if someone like the button or the cutoff min raises, you better be calling, because with the ante in play, with no rake on any individual hand, like in a tournament, you simply must defend very wide, even out of position. So we see the flop. It comes 8-5-2. Mulecker has the middle pair. Jepson has the gut shot straight draw. In this scenario, Mulecker checks. Jepson makes a continuation bet of 234,000 into the 680,000 chip pot, which I think is perfectly fine with the gut shot. You may say, but what if you get raised? Well, you're not folding. When you flop a gut shot straight draw with an overcard, heads up, you are betting and not folding if you get raised. You can also bet in this scenario with some pretty junky draws that you plan to bet and then fold if you get raised. This is going to be stuff like backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw type hands. And then you're also going to want to bet with a lot of your best hands, probably most pairs, maybe even some of your best ace highs, etc. So Jepson goes for the bet. And with the middle pair, Mulecker's already in a pretty rough spot. Typically, you want to call with hands like middle pair, but as your middle pair gets worse and worse and worse, and it is more and more vulnerable to being outdrawn, you should at least consider raising. That said, in this scenario, I would pretty much always just check call. Notice Mulecker is completely out of his time bank. GG gives you a very long time bank at the start of the final table, but if you run out, you're on a pretty short clock. And notice here, Mulecker has about 15 seconds to act on every betting round. It's not really where you want to be, but that's sometimes how it goes. It's actually kind of interesting to consider, because if you are someone who actually does use your entire time bank by the end of the tournament, you are probably playing kind of slowly, right? But if you play kind of slowly in general, when you get to the end of the tournament, you really, really, really don't want to be out of time, because that's when it matters most. So make sure when you're playing in a tournament that has a time bank, as most online tournaments do, that you do not burn your time bank unnecessarily. Some people will just like take a break and go for a walk and time out for 2 minutes. Don't be doing that, because that's going to result in you sometimes finding yourself in a pretty tough spot. Now, of course, if you do have a difficult scenario and you have to take some time to consider it, certainly do that. But just make sure you're not wasting it. I have no clue how Mulecker ran out of time, but just make sure that you do not squander your time. He probably didn't. He's a world-class player. Let's see what he does. He puts in the check raise to 700K, about 3 times Jepson's bet. And you may say, why check raise the middle pair? Well, it makes sense from a protection point of view for sure. The problem, though, is that if Jepson has any sort of decent draw in this scenario, or made hand that's better than any pair, a lot of those are going to be better than 6-5. This is a spot where he's never folding. And when he's facing this relatively small check raise in relation to the pot, he's going to have to continue with all sorts of stuff that has pretty good equity. So notice even if he has a hand like Jack 10 of spades for backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw with overcards, Jepson now has to put in about 450,000 to win a pot that's going to be about 2 million. So will he realize 20% equity in position? Yes, he will. So I think if Mulecker wanted to raise, he should probably go bigger, just a little bit bigger. That said, I think calling is definitely the default, but he does raise. Fine. Can Jepson fold the gut shot? Absolutely not. Should he re-raise as a bluff? Absolutely not. In this scenario, if Mulecker does have an 8 or better, he's obviously never going to fold, and a lot of his check raising range in the scenario will be his best made hands, including a lot of eights. So this is a spot where the 9-6 should just call and try to get there or potentially run a bluff on a later betting round. 9-6 will obviously realize 20% equity in position. So you just have to call. Jepson's sitting over there with plenty of time bank. 4 minutes, 20 seconds left. Enjoying himself over there. If you're enjoying yourself, do me a favor. Click the like and subscribe button if you're watching here on YouTube. If you're listening to the audio podcast, make sure you check out youtube.com/pokercoaching. Thank you. Turns of 4 of spades. And now I think Molacher has 2 options. He can either check, looking to check call, or he can bet small. When you bet big in this scenario, pot's 2 million, Molacher has 6.3 behind, you're not really bluffing, right? You're not trying to get an 8 to fold, so we're value betting, right? When you're value betting with a very clear marginal made hand, as this 6-5 is, you usually want to be betting on the small side, because if you bet big, mostly better hands will call. Whereas if you do bet small, you will get called by stuff like ace high when the turn is a 4, like it is in this scenario. And that's what you're trying to get called by. The problem, though, is that if you bet and get raised or jammed, it's miserably bad, because at this point we have a gut shot. We have double gut shot, right? Notice if a 3 comes, we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If a 7 comes, we have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if we bet and get shoved, it's pretty terrible. Because of that, I think you probably just want to check. But Molacher puts in a small bet, which, again, I think is fine. It is worth noting, if you bet bigger here, like let's say 1.3 million or 2 million into the 2 million chip pot and gets jammed, he probably has to fold, but that would be awful, right? So you just want to make sure you make a bet size that will essentially never result in you getting jammed. And I think a bet of something like 700K in this scenario, as Molacher does, will probably result in mostly calls or small raises, which is fine because you can continue against those raises. All right, Jepson now with the 9-6 has the double gut shot as well. He certainly cannot fold. Question is, should he call or should he raise? Facing this small bet, what would you do in this scenario? I want you to take a second, consider this scenario, pause the video, and write what you would do in the comment section below. All right. Clearly, we're not going to fold. We're getting great odds just to draw to a straight or a 9, so we're definitely not going to fold immediately. The question is, should we call, raise small, or jam? Calling's definitely fine. Anytime you're getting straight immediate odds to try to draw, well, you're getting straight immediate odds to draw to your straight, because in this scenario, he has to put in 700 to try to win 3.5 million. He's going to get there about 18-ish% of the time, not even counting when he improves to a 9. You know you're continuing. So the question is raising better? And I don't really think he wants to have much of a raising range in this spot, because if he does have a straight, he's going to be able to get all the money in by the river anyway. And if he has a hand like 2 pair, he doesn't need a ton of protection. I realize there is a flush draw available on the turn, and there are various gut shot straight draws available, or even open-ended straight draws available. But this is a scenario where if you have 2 pair, I don't think you need to raise either. So I think in this spot, once you get check raised on the flop and face any reasonable turn bet, you probably just want to call with everything. That said, if you do think Molacher's range is way more condensed / linear, meaning he just has a whole lot of hands like a 5 or a 2 or a 4 that will be in a pretty tough spot if you jam, then I think jamming becomes quite a good play. And I would just rip it all in. You want to put him in a pretty rough spot. And you could do this here with your good but vulnerable made hands like 2 pair, ace 8, stuff like that. And then also some high equity flush draws, I think. However, I think in this scenario, you probably just want to call with everything. It's a tough spot for me to analyze because I'm obviously trying to not be results-oriented. You don't want to be results-oriented when you're looking at a hand. But this is a scenario where I would not really expect Molacher to have a whole lot of hands like 6-5, right? So if he doesn't have a whole lot of hands like 6-5, and he's way more polarized in that scenario, you really just don't want to raise. I actually discussed this thoroughly in my tournament masterclass at pokercoaching.com. Make sure you check it out at pokercoaching.com. All right, let's see what the 9-6 does. Obviously, if you know your opponent's exact strategy, you can play accordingly. But as your opponent's range gets more and more linear or more marginal, you definitely want to do a whole lot more raising. But in general, when you get check raised and your opponent keeps betting the turn, they're essentially saying, I have a really good hand or a draw. If they have a really good hand or a draw, you in turn just don't get to raise. All right, river is the jack of spades. Molocker has middle pair now. I mean, I'm sticking with the same strategy I would have used on the flop. I would have check called flop, check called turn, probably check folded by the river. But once we check raise flop and bet turn at this point, Jepson either has a good made hand like an 8 or better, or some sort of draw, right? So when the river comes the jack of spades, can you get him off of an 8? Almost certainly not in my mind. Do we think we can get value from a worse hand? I mean, I highly doubt it, right? What are we trying to even get called by? A hand like ace 4? Seems unlikely you're going to get called by that if you make a big bet. So I think Molocker's only options are to check or bet small. And I don't mind a small bet in this scenario, but I think the default play is probably just the check. It's definitely going to be tough if you face a bet, though. Molocker's marginal made hand does opt to check. Now over to Jepson. He has the 9 high. Zip and pip. I mean, he got a bluff. Seems pretty obvious. I think you'd rather have a spade in your hand to block your opponent's blushes that may get tricky and check. It is worth noting if Molocker bets every flush on the river, which I don't think he does. I'm sure he's going to check some of them. But if he does bet every backdoor flush on the river, then you don't really care if you have a spade. You'd rather not have a spade, right? Because if you know he has no flushes, then the spade blocker is irrelevant. That said, this is a spot where when you're on the river with is this the actual nut low? I don't know. It's pretty bad. When you're at the river with a very, very, very bad hand, you need to bluff. You definitely just need to fire out a bluff. Because if you check, you always lose. And the problem is you could easily be against a hand like 9-7 that decided to get a little bit frisky. Or a hand like 10-9 that decided to give up by the river. Or a hand like ace-2 that decided to check raise flop bet turn that will fold out on the river. Maybe a hand like 4-3 that decided to bet the turn, right? There are a lot of very, very marginal hands that your opponent can have in this spot, even if they do check raise reasonably to begin with. So I think you got to bet. And I think you got to bet on the big side because we are trying to get something like a 2 or a 4 or a 5 to fold. I don't think we want to necessarily go too big, though, like all in, because if we go all in, an 8's just not going to fold. And if Molocker is trapping with a straight or a random river jack, which, he could have something like, I don't know, jack 10 of diamonds, he decided to get after it. Those hands are, of course, not going to fold. So I'm sure from a GTO point of view, we do want to have some shoves in our range. But I have to imagine when we are shoving it all in, we probably want to have a spade blocker. So balancing the scenario is very hard. I'm sure I'm getting some of this wrong from a perfectly GTO point of view. Feel free to run it on your end if you want. Let me know in the comment section what size we should use with the 9-6 of hearts. I have to presume, though, we're betting with the 9-6 of hearts, and I think the right play here is pretty medium, like probably something like 1.7 million, half pot. You're going to find GTO solver in these scenarios usually uses something like a half pot bet and then a gigantic all-in bet. Let's see what C. Jepson does in this scenario. Just don't check. Checking, I think, is the only thing you can do very wrong in this scenario. He's going to give it some thought because he has plenty of time bank left. GG lets us know about the overlay and the daily turbo. Thanks for that. And he does go for the half pot bet. Nice. Always makes me happy when I would have played the hand exactly as Jepson did in this scenario because it lets me know we're at least doing okay, right? Over to Molocker. I mean, this is a pretty rough spot. I don't hate calling just right off the bat because he has a random 5 of spades blocker blocking a few flushes. He also has a 5 blocking 2 pair that would go for value. It's a neat spot because would Jepson go for value with an 8, which I think is his most likely hand in this scenario to get to the river? And I think the answer is probably not, but maybe. This is where it's very important to know your opponent. I don't think I've ever played with Jepson. I don't know if he's going for thin value in this spot or not. I have to imagine Molocker's played with him some. So he may have an idea if Jepson's going to be willing to go for thin value in scenarios like this, whereas I'm kind of clueless, essentially. But against good players, when I block straights, I block flushes, I usually just find a hero call. The problem, though, is that he's played this hand so aggressively. He check raise flop, bet turn, check the river. It looks like he's going to check call with a whole lot of hands like an 8 in this scenario in my mind. So, in Molocker's shoes, I mean. So, for that reason, for Jepson to bet, he has to be a little bit cautious. There aren't actually a ton of garbage hands in his range at this point, besides hands like 9-6 and 9-7, and I suppose random 3s, like King 3, backdoor flush draw. some of which made a flush on the river. So it's kind of hard to find bluffs. When it's kind of hard to find bluffs and your range looks like a pretty strong marginal made hand that's going to be check calling, I guess that leans you towards folding. I don't know what the right play is. Let me know in the comments what you would do. It's a tough spot. Obviously, everyone in the YouTube comment section is going to say call because you're against the 9 high. But I don't know what I would do here. Actually, I do know what I would do here. I would just call because I always call. If you all know me, you get me on the river with a pair, lots of draws miss. I'm finding a reluctant call. Let's see what Molocker does with no time bank, no time to think about it. He gives it about 5 seconds of thought that he's allowed. Times out and folds. Giving Jepson a nice pot and eventually the title. Congrats to Jepson on winning. Congrats to Molocker for taking second place. Nice job to both of them. Fun hand, right? It's a weird spot where I think a lot of people figure out a way to not win the pot with the 9-6 here, even though I think the line is pretty standard. You got a continuation bet the flop. You have to call the small check raise. You have to call the small turn bet. And you have to bluff the river. It's the only option. If you'd have played it differently, you probably would have messed up. But that's okay. That's why we're here. We're working together. We're learning together and improving our skills. That's going to be it today. That's going to be it for today. If you enjoyed this video, let me know by clicking the like and subscribe button below. Also, click the notification bell. We put out lots of videos here, and tell your friends. I'm doing everything I can to help you improve your poker skills, so you might as well spread the love, spread the knowledge, and how about someone you know? Good luck in your games. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and as a thank you, I'm going to channel all of my poker knowledge into your brain right now. Oh wait, that didn't work. Sorry, you're gonna have to keep studying. Go ahead and click the subscribe button right here, and I'll see you in the next video.